Greetings everybody, my name is Tommy the Game Master and welcome to my channel. Well, I reviewed the original Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster, and after playing it, I kinda wanted to play the rest of them. While not having the extra content of previous versions of these games is still a bad thing, I was impressed with the music and curious with how the rest of the series would go. So I decided just to bite the bullet and pick the rest up. While I do still have my copy of Final Fantasy II on my phone and do want to play through it at some later time, I have played about 20 minutes of it and I can say yes, there is definitely missing story content. You don't have to go through much of the old iOS or PSP version to see that there is missing story content in these Pixel Perfect remasters. I do want to play through it, but after I'm done with the rest of the Pixel Perfect remasters, you have to forgive me here, and that is because Final Fantasy II is a steaming hot mess and there's only so much of it I can take. So, saying that, does it earn its reputation as the worst game in the series? Well, from a technical standpoint, the answer to that is yes. But Final Fantasy VIII and 13 do a way better job of pissing me the hell off than this game ever did. To be fair, I only played through the PS1 version, and that was almost 20 years ago, and then I've just played through the Pixel Perfect remaster and finished it today as of this recording. And replaying it again, I can definitely say the game earns all of its bad reputations, but that doesn't mean there aren't any enjoyable parts or that it isn't at least worth trying. That said, my recommendation is put this on your Steam wishlist and wait for a 75% off or more sale before thinking about picking this one up. You do not want this at full price because it's just not worth $10 in my opinion. Now, I'm going to go talk about the history of this game real fast. And that history is that this game was originally supposed to get a North American release on the NES, but Square got cold feet at the last moment due to the SNES being released at the time and just the amount of money and time it would take to translate a game for an outdated system. You see, those text files in games, they have to be translated. They can take up several kilobytes or bits of information. Now, you may laugh at that today, kiddies, that with your games now being dozens of gigs long and on mediums that can oftentimes store 50 to 100 gigs of information and thumb drives that can save up an entire terabyte of information. But back in the 80s, most NES games were about a meg or two. Yeah, you see why a lot of NES games didn't bother having a lot of text? And because of that, not a whole lot of localization staff was kept on hand. Those big RPGs like Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy took a while to do, like years sometimes, to get a North American release. In this case, the SNES was releasing and Square decided to just release their fourth entry into the series and call it Final Fantasy II here. We wouldn't have a proper Final Fantasy II until around 2003, when it was remade for the PlayStation, but believe it or not, that might be the reason why Final Fantasy is so big here. You see, their rival at the time, Enix, decided to take the time to translate all their NES Dragon Quest games and release them over here, long after the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis were released. And they all bombed big time because everyone was playing either the Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis and having fights over which console was the best. In the end, Final Fantasy became the poster child for JRPGs, and Dragon Quest is kind of considered a niche series over here. Well, let's talk about this game's story, if you want to call it that. Ever seen Star Wars? Good. Ever wanted in a medieval fantasy settings? Well, then Final Fantasy II story might kinda interest you a little bit. And I'm not joking. There's so many callouts and references to the original Star Wars trilogy, it's almost kinda funny. Our first Cid in the series here, he is for the most part Han Solo of sorts. You can pay him to take rides in his airship, and you meet him at a bar full of scum and villainy. In another scene, the Emperor gets a dreadnought and uses it to wreak havoc on several cities. Again, replace the dreadnought with the word Death Star and you will still get my meaning. And yes, you do have to blow it up, but not before you have to find and rescue a princess that's aboard it. Throw it in the Dark Knight here, which is an obvious reference to Vader. And yes, he is related to one of the characters, but I'll get to that in a moment because there's part of the characters that are just a hot mess that I want to talk about. But let's really focus in about the plot, at least for a moment or two, before I get sidetracked again with the script. So basically, the Empire of Palmacia, which consists of only a Colosseum and sort of a big castle in the mountains, has decided that it wants to take over the world, and they have attacked the Kingdom of Flynn. For use, Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon try to escape, but get attacked and are all kind of just wiped out right away. Firion wakes up, though, at the rebel base after being found nearly dead, and it looks like Maria and Guy managed to find their way to the base. After proving their worth to the rebels by sneaking back into Flynn and visiting a mortally wounded prince and retrieving his ring, they become full-time active members of the rebellion. First few missions involve trying to stop the Emperor's dreadnought and obtain Mithril, which is being made by the Dark Knight. Now, Star Wars references aside, the game does do a good job of showing what the Empire attacks does when a dreadnought decides to swoop in and attack a village. And you go in and you see houses with pieces of the roof missing and holes in the sidewalks and streets, as well as less people wandering outside to talk to than there were before. This game can get deliciously dark sometimes, and that's one of the few things I can say about it in its favor. But you do eventually find a way to destroy the dreadnought, but not before the Empire kidnaps Princess Hilda, and you have to sneak aboard and rescue her. That sounds familiar? I wonder if Firion's a little short to be a stormtrooper. And then after you rescue her, an evil monster appears and tries to seduce and kill Firion, proving that the Hilda you rescued was a fake. Which brings me to another problem with this game's story, as far as the four quote-unquote main characters. Their personality and character traits are never really defined. The side characters that join you on for a dungeon have more of a backstory, background, and personality than the main characters. Minwu here, at least we know, is a high-ranking white mage, and he, of course, spouts off wisdom. Joseph, we know, is a father with a young daughter and sees protecting his village as something to be cherished above all else, and therefore can be stubborn to go along with you on your quest. And Richard here is the last of the Dragoons and is trying to avenge his people. But the main characters don't get any backgrounds other than their four youths from Flynn, and these problems start popping up big time as the story goes along, such as this scene. Right here is about the only time Firion shows he has a character, and that is he's a young virgin. By the way, the Pixel Perfect collection shows Hilda at least under the sheets. In some versions, she's just standing up on top of the bed, which makes this scene unintentionally hilarious. But that's not the only time you're left scratching your head and wondering just who are these characters we're playing as and why are things happening. The most infamous, of course, is the Guy Speaks Beaver. Now, to be fair, the illustrations do show Guy is a wild man. He's supposed to be in all these skins and stuff. You don't really see that as his official look even in the Pixel Perfect remaster, but he's supposed to be a wild man. But here's the problem. The game says they are four youths and friends from Flynn. What little dialogue they do have leads you to believe they have known each other all their lives. Then why is Guy here such a wild man that he knows how to speak beaver and speaks broken English like he wasn't taught how to speak properly. You know, Gal from 6 acts that way because his father threw him into the wilderness when he was a young boy. But that's not the biggest what the hell problem with this story. Oh no, the biggest plot twist is the revelation that the Dark Knight here has actually been Leon the whole time. What? How? Why? We know that Leon is Maria's brother, but beyond that, we know really nothing about him. So why betray his friends and sister? I mean, he does do things that could get them killed several times. How and why did he join the Empire? And how did he become the Empire's top lackey so fast? It just really makes no sense. And we're never given a reason for the scope of his betrayal. And of course he joins you in the final level because of reasons. No, it's never explained why he chose to help Furion at the last moment, other than it's probably just to save his own skin. At any rate, back to the plot so far. After the rest of the gang jump in to save Furion from being killed, you find the real Hilda is locked away in the Colosseum. Furion goes to save her, only to be stopped by the Dark Knight / Leon and thrown into the dungeon. They break out with the real princess, take her back to Flynn, and an easy-to-do castle raid. You just run forward, and then do a whole bunch of side quests to get the Ultima spell, which really isn't that powerful. More on this game's weaknesses in the gameplay, and then another stupid moment happens. The Empire's second Death Star is a tornado. No, I'm not joking, and he uses it to wreak havoc and destroy half the towns in the world, which makes getting that airship that you get shortly a lot less impressive because there's nothing to go back to. But fortunately, Furion manages to befriend Richter a Dragoon and get a Wyvern back, and with its help they both get aboard the fortress in the tornado and then manage to track down and kill the Emperor, who looks more like Jared from the movie Labyrinth than Palpatine from Star Wars. Maybe all this time he was just trying to see what kind of magic spell to use. The answer to that is, of course, dance, magic, dance. Anyways, killing him brings about a false ending because now Leon's taken over the Empire and he wants to conquer the world too. Yes, again, that vast empire that consists of no towns, just a Colosseum dungeon and a castle. That's a really super intimidating display you got there, dude. Also, Sid now kicks the bucket in a supposedly sad scene with super sad music. Wait, who was this guy again? No, seriously, other than to pay him for an airship ride and telling us how to destroy the Dreadnought, the only other time we've seen him is when he was imprisoned with fake Princess Hilda. We don't know the guy, but yet we are supposed to be sad that he died, and he knew us well enough to hand over his most prized possession, his airship. I have been a bit too hard on Final Fantasy 15 when it comes to the love interest dying, because she was so completely forgettable that I've already forgot her name already. But at least there was effort there. Here, there's none. This guy might as well have been a complete stranger. Well, whatever. Furion takes the airship and then goes confronts Leon, only to have Jared here be so evil that when he was killed, he managed to go directly to hell and take over the place, and now he's back to destroy the world. Leon decides now he wants to be members of the good guy, and Furion just lets him back in, despite the fact that he tried to kill him several times, and that is never addressed. And then they go down back to the Empire's place, kill him, and then Leon decides he doesn't want to be friends anymore and just leaves. And then the game ends, but not before we get a homage to the Force Ghost from Return of the Jedi. Yeah, the story's kinda nuts, but I do enjoy how dark it can get. A person joins you as a fourth member, they're probably going to die in some horrible way by the end of it. Unless they're named Gordon. He manages to go in and out of your team without something bad happening to him. So all this dark stuff, and it pulls no punches like I said. You do see towns get bombarded and get destroyed. This isn't bad stuff for NES writing. But unfortunately, all the leads are all boring. Furion, all we know is he's a virgin. Maria's the girl. And of course, guys speak beaver. And that's about it. It makes the game story less than compelling. Like the rest of the game, I give the story an A for effort, but D- for execution. Well, where to start? Well, I like the idea this game has. I just really hate the execution, though. First off, the game is fully open world, and I do mean that. You see here, the game really is one big land mass. It's possible to go wherever you want without needing a ship or having to fly around in an airship, with a few exceptions. And I kind of like that. You can go where you want and backtrack if you miss something. And since it's not super large or cumbersome to get around, you can get anywhere really easily. But if you do need a little help or are just in a hurry, you can either charter a boat or get Sid to fly around to certain places. On the bad side, though, plenty of backtracking. Expect to go back to the Rebel base to get your next mission and your next destination. A whole lot. Now, on to the ideas I like, but are poorly executed. There is no leveling up, at least in the traditional sense. Instead, your stats go up by how much you use them. Get hit, and your defense and HP goes up, or at least has a chance to go up. There's a little bit of randomness to it. Use magic, then your MP goes up. Equip a sword and use it a lot in combat, your sword skill level goes up, and you get to attack more per turn when equipped with a sword. Same goes with magic. More characters use a spell, that spell gets more powerful and does more damage, but also costs more MP. So why doesn't this work? Well, first off, remember what I said about the overworld? It's super small. There's not a lot of enemy varieties, at least at first, that'll give you problem. It turns out the best way to really level up is to beat the crap out of each other and hope your HP and strength goes up. Next problem, there isn't a wide variety of weapons. Sticks to spears, swords, bows, and an occasional axe, and ignore everything else if you want to become stronger. But the worst part is the magic. Going back to how spells become stronger, this works on paper, but not in practice. Why? Because every spell you get, regardless of when you get it, starts at level 1. You go to level them up, and there isn't any balance. So starting at the beginning and sticking to one spell is the best thing to do when it comes to attack spells. But other spells like Isuna have to be leveled up before they're any use. If you get petrified, you can't Isuna it away without having someone with a Isuna level 6 or higher. And then of course the best example of how crap this magic system is the Ultima spell. The spell that scared the mages of a country called Mysidia so bad they hid themselves away, put it in a tall tower, and then had a giant sea monster guard the tower, and then have another kicker have the final seal only be able to be broken by someone sacrificing themselves to do it. Yeah, this is going to be a kick-ass spell, right? Right? Well, kind of is the answer. You see, to get it, it starts out at a level 1, meaning you have to grind with it several hours before it becomes more potent than your average fire or blizzard spell, that is. And then there's also a whole bunch of stuff that it deals with, what your attack stats and magic stats are and how much you've maxed stuff out. It's really a crap spell in the end unless you really want to grind. And when you can figure that you can just stick with your fire and blizzard spells and get more use out of them and be more powerful than the Ultima, it's kind of a downer in the fact that, you can also say your flares and your holy spells also start out at level 1 and need to be grinded in order to increase their attack strength to where they're even more powerful than basic spells. they're just really not worth it. And while they're kick-ass in other Final Fantasy games, here they're just kind of meh. Oh yeah, and you know that trope that you should never use status-changing effects like blind, silent, slow, etc. on enemies because it's always a waste of magic in a turn? Meanwhile, the enemies will pelt you with this and get an even unfair game over using them? Final Fantasy II is the king of that trope. Again, you have to level up that magic to get it to work, so unless you want to waste a lot of turns casting blind spells, that won't work, so you might get a chance that they might work on a tough enemy later. You're going to have to do that. In the meantime, you get monsters towards the end of the game that can cast poison, stone, paralysis, and even confusions on the characters just by hitting them, and it works 100% of the time. This is such a pain. Again, you better be just casting Asuna sometimes just to cast Asuna, so you can get that level up, or else you're going to be toast when you get to these monsters. Anyways, what can I say about the dungeons in this game? They were done by trolls who wanted to see how much they can piss people off. The dungeons are half-ass at best. The big thing, starting off about the second dungeon and getting worse as you progress, are these doors that you enter that you start you right in the middle of this empty room. And walking out of this is hard because your encounter rate is sky high. Or I should say at least in other versions it is. I'll be fair here, they don't do that in the pixel perfect version. Your encounter rate's the normal in this realm. But still, if you get attacked in these rooms, the monsters you're going to fight are going to be a lot tougher than what they are in the regular dungeon itself. And it's not one dungeon, it's all of them. And there are a lot of exits. You're going to have to pick one of these doors, pick wisely, or else you're going to get attacked. It's infuriating, and it gets old very fast. The stage designers that normally do Final Fantasy games must have been taking a holiday and let the B team in charge of the dungeon designs, because they're just not very fun. And the last dungeon really makes use of this whole fake door thing. The Jade Road, it's just filled with fake doors with one door that you have to find in order to proceed to the next point. And by the way, there's no places to save in this final dungeons, and there's two areas, this Jade Road, and then finally the Emperor's Castle. And it took me just shy of 2 hours to get to Demon Jared here and put him down. Thankfully, the Pixel Perfect Collection does have a quick save feature to minimize this frustration, but oh boy, if I was playing it on the PlayStation 1, I would not be happy. Yes, the gameplay in Final Fantasy II has tons of problems, from bad level designs to a level up system that is good in theory, but just doesn't work in practice. The only good thing I can say is it does reward exploration. It does at least reward the fact that your characters do get stronger the more you use a certain item, but there's just too much wrong with it for me to say that the battle system is good. All the things I said about Final Fantasy I pixel perfect graphics are true here. Again, we see them combining both the looks of some of the remakes, but at the same time sticking to redrawn NES sprites, at least for the main characters and villains, throw in some 3D effects here and there, and it does give the pixel perfect games a very unique look when it comes to old JRPG remakes. There's still a lot of shimmering on my computer. Granted, my computer is a little bit old and my monitor is even older, but the shimmering is distracting, so hence why all my videos are shot in the large window. If SE ever manages to fix the problem, then this game will be perfect, because I do enjoy the way it looks. I like the status screens too, as they do a good job of capturing the 8-bit looks, with the fact that these are supposed to be young kids. Maria here is a cute, wide-eyed innocent compared to the ones that I saw in the iOS version, where she looks like she's about to drink my blood. Completely overhaul and upgraded. The music sounds really good. The music in Final Fantasy II never really impressed me that much, at least compared to the original and some of the later sequels. and there are a lot of ho-hum tracks here. But still, with the overworld remix sounding awesome, a lot of the dungeon remix don't sound half bad. And I just love the fact that they added this kind of this like evil chant as you go through the real final dungeon as you approach the final boss. It's just superb. Good going on the music, Square Enix. If you don't want the game, then I do say purchase the soundtrack. It is actually available on Steam and well worth a purchase. Just check it out. Anyways, is Final Fantasy II the worst Final Fantasy game? Yes, on a technical side it is. Does that mean it's not worth trying out? Yes, it's worth giving a shot if you can wait for a sale and getting it at a right price. I recommend trying to get this one at $5 or less, folks. It really isn't a great game, but it is worth trying. And the other Final Fantasy Perfect releases should get your attention first. I just played a little bit of Final Fantasy IV a few days ago, and I can say what I played is super stellar on that, especially when it comes to the music and some of the designs. Can't wait to see what they're going to do with the Super Nintendo games. Anyways, this is Tommy the Game Master. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. I'll see you guys later.